Well, after that, it's time now to turn to today's perspective. And today, we're looking at what the mindset might have been for Nobel Prize-winning author Samuel Beckett in his final days. A new novel published here in France takes us into the imaginary mind of the Irish writer in a tale that uses a lot of facts from his life and those around him to question how Beckett may have analysed his life in the end. It's a novel that also begs the reader to ask themselves what's left in the end. What are we all waiting for? The book in French is called Le Tiers-Temps, which is the name of the nursing home that Samuel Beckett spent his last days in. Author Maylis Besserie joins us now. Maylis, it's your first novel. Looking at the end of days, why Beckett?
Well, I had this very strong connection with Ireland, and Beckett's work has always been between two countries, France and Ireland, and between two languages. And I also wanted to write about him because I was very interested by his plays and the music of his language and the powerful sentences he had. And so when I found out that at the end of his life he ended in a nursing home in Paris, I just thought, oh my God, he became kind of one of his own characters. And so I just imagined the voice he had, how he was talking to himself, the thoughts he could have maybe when he was there. So I decided that he would be the narrator, talking as a first person, and that he would imagine everything what happens here is a kind of way of inventing stories.
Indeed, and there's a lot of references and flashbacks to his life and indeed his works, his screenplay, and paralleling what he may have actually lived in those final days. But, you know, you said it there yourself, to get into the mindset of Beckett. It sounds like a very daunting task because you imagine he's thinking almost like he wrote a lot of his works. You know, how does one go about that?
Well, it's a fiction. So Beckett in my book is obviously has the same biography in a way of Samuel Beckett, but he also became a character on his own. So the idea of him talking as I was because there's a lot of monologue in Beckett's work, and I just thought that it would be the only way to make him imagine in that kind of place where all people end their life, and it could be very depressing. But he always has this, in Beckett's eyes, there's always this sense of humor, and everything became absurd because everything is so complicated, and there are all these relationships with nurses and doctors and physiotherapists, and everything can become a bit of as a scene of a play. And so Beckett was a kind of mix between himself in real life, but I also had to imagine the way he was talking. He's not writing in the nursing home, he's talking to himself. So it was the only way for me not to imitate the style of Beckett, but to create a new voice.
Indeed, but I guess to imagine his voice in his head, I mean, you're inspired by not just maybe his plays, his novels, but we have seen a lot of documentaries, a lot of interviews with him, and you do look at the relationship he had with all of the other people in his life, notably the Joyces, James Joyce's daughter, and all of that. How did you make that line between the amount you kept fact and the freedom you let yourself have to imagine how he might have reacted?
A lot of freedom, actually, because we have very few interviews of Beckett. He was known as a very shy and quiet man, and which is a kind of paradox because in other way he has met a lot of people during his life and had a very long correspondence which has been published in French and in English. And he had his biography is full of many details that not a lot of people know. Of course, we know that he had a strong connection with James Joyce, that he worked and made some research for him for Finnegan's Wake, that he has this relationship with Lucia Joyce, and later during the war he was in the resistance, so he had a very interesting biography. But my point of view was more to take just the few elements of the biography that won't be total blasphemy for a Beckett fan, and invent this life he had at the nursing home, which is completely invented because I have no information about that. So I just went to the place, which does exist at the moment, but he has changed very much, so I could imagine a lot from there.
Indeed, fascinating to see. And part of me thinks, I think you'd be quite amused to see how you have imagined him. How long did it take you to write this book? And in a way, given that you had to get into his mind, how easy is it to leave you? Is that still haunting in a way?
It is actually. I had this voice in my head, which was a mix of English and French. And there's a lot of English in the book. The book is in French, but there's a lot of English.
Some Irish in the book,
yes,
actually, which I was very impressed with.
Yes, a bit. But the English English image, the English expressions are translated into French. And I thought he always kept this bilingual way of thinking. And maybe the English came back at the end of his life. And I wanted to keep that and to keep this Irishness, because French people do forget that he wasn't French. And I thought it's a bit of a shame, and I wanted to have that in the book.
I think a lot of us Irish would be very happy for that. But you do say you were inspired because of his bilingualism and the links between the Irish and the French. But why does that interest you?
Because of the many trips I have done there, and because I've been to Ireland since my childhood. So I've been very interested in Irish literature too.
And in this book, you comment through Samuel Beckett on how the Irish see the French. And, I know Beckett believes that to understand your own country, you had to move abroad and see it from outside. Is that something you agree with?
Yeah, there's a lot of Irish writers I know for their exile, James Joyce and Beckett. And I like the way Beckett plays with that, and his humor, which is very Irish in a way, his very dark humor. And I thought that in a nursing home, everything can be very funny and dark humor. So I thought that in a way, he was experiencing what he had wrote, and he was a bit funny in a way, because through his eyes, everything can become very metaphysical in a way, but also very precise, with a lot of detail that makes things a bit happier. And it's a happy way to talk about oldness too.
Indeed, oldness and death, which I now realise living abroad, the Irish do have perhaps a different relationship with other countries. But because Samuel Beckett had such a rich life, I was curious to see, the focus on the very end when he comes across, as you were saying, as many of his characters. He isn't perhaps as strong as we might first imagine. He has, like all humans, the weaknesses and the decay at the end. Tell me why you picked the end of his days.
Well, what I liked is the kind of gap between what the body can't do and how is the mind. And my idea is like the body is a bit limited now, like in his plays, but the mind is quite vivid. And it's maybe the opposite. I mean, the slower is the body, the faster is the brain. And I like this idea of oldness, who could be a very vivid moment and joyful moment to imagine stories. And at the nursing home, he's a kind of watcher. He's not participating to the animation and everything what happened there. He takes his meal in his own room, but he sees and hears everything which happened around him. And because he has in his heart all the words of the beautiful writing and the beautiful novels he read, and he has the words of James Joyce and all the painting he saw in his life, it's a great comfort to him to have all this in his memory, and it kept him quite happy for a while. But the information I had is that he ended after a time of coma. And so it was a way to invent a new kind of dialogue between the nurse and what he heard and couldn't answer. So in a creative way, it was interesting for the writing to imagine how he cannot answer to the nurse, but answer to the writer in a way, because he's still speaking in his mind.
Yeah, this independent observer and analytical mind right until the end. I don't know if it's just a poetic coincidence, but you start the book looking at that loss of words and James Joyce's loss of sight as he goes through, and you end with Samuel Beckett's one of his only perhaps screenplay, the film, and that opening of the eye and closing of the eye. Deliberate?
Yeah, deliberate, because for me the writers are watchers, and he keeps watching through the window everything what happens there. And we know from the very important biography, James Knowlson biography of Beckett, that he was watching everything. And so I thought it was a kind of tribute, and it was a way to describe writing, and it's a kind of universal thing that happened to a great man, but it's a common thing at the same time.
Certainly was a very pleasing conclusion to the book and all those parallels. Thanks so much for coming in and giving us a better flavour of it. Maylis Besserie, it's currently out in French, Le Théâtre, but maybe perhaps we'll see it in English someday. Thanks so much for telling us more about it.